Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
And I'm Sunny. Ready to dive in.
Whoops, almost lost my coffee there. Seems like it's just one of those days in the studio, huh? Keeping it real.
Always lively here. But hey, spills or no spills, we've got a really compelling topic today, something that's been rattling around in my head quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely weighty stuff, but, hopefully we can connect some important dots, kind of see the bigger picture. Today, we're really digging into what we're calling unfinished wars, from Israel to Taiwan.
That's it. Looking at how these historical conflicts, these old stories, still really shape today's challenges. And maybe, just maybe, find some lessons that connect situations that seem, worlds apart.
But grab your beverage, maybe put a lid on it, and let's get into it. Okay, so let's kick things off with a statement that, wow, it really makes you stop and think. It's often attributed to Golda Meir, the former Israeli prime minister. It's pretty stark.
Yeah, it definitely is.
The quote, you hear it in a few ways, but essentially it's something like, if the Palestinians lay down their weapons, there will be peace. If the Israelis lay down their weapons, there will be a massacre. Or maybe if the Arabs put down their weapons today, there would be no more violence. Same core idea, right? The gravity is the same.
It absolutely cuts right to the bone, doesn't it? And it really gets to the heart of how a nation perceives its own survival, its security calculus. Now, yeah, widely attributed to Golda Meir, prime minister from 69 to 74.
Right.
And while, pinning down the exact date or the precise wording can be a bit fuzzy, it definitely captures the feeling, the strategic thinking in Israel back then, and honestly, for a long time after. The record points to speeches or interviews in the early 70s.
Yep.
You might see online, maybe even places like Goodreads, saying it was Netanyahu, but no. The historical record, the speeches from that time, they really point strongly to Meir. People mention about Ibn too, maybe, but the evidence for Meir is just, it's much stronger.
So this wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark for her, was it? I mean, what was going on then? What was the backdrop, the historical context that leads someone to say something so absolute? What did 1969 Israel even feel like?
Oh, definitely not casual. The context is everything here. Look, Meir had this deep, almost gut-level understanding or belief that Israel's survival was completely tied to its military strength, to constant vigilance. And this feeling was super strong after the 67 Six-Day War. I mean, yes, it was a huge military victory for Israel. They gained a lot of territory. But the time right after, it was incredibly tense, volatile, constant threats.
Right.
Israel saw itself as, surrounded by enemies, Arab nations talking about wiping them out. So for Meir and for a lot of Israelis, the military wasn't just defense. It was the ultimate guarantee they'd even continue to exist. It wasn't about power projection. It was about survival.
Period.
She actually said something really telling to Senator Joe Biden back then, something like, our secret weapon is that we have nowhere else to go. That's not, policy speak. That's raw. It's existential, feeling like your back's against the wall.
That puts it in such a different light. It's not just strategy, it's identity.
Yeah.
It's this profound anxiety, this feeling of, like you said, nowhere else to go, like defending your only home against someone who wants to tear it down.
Yeah.
That kind of desperation, it changes the entire equation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And that brings us right to the core meaning of her statement, what people call the asymmetry of the conflict. Well, from Israel's viewpoint anyway.
Okay.
So in Meir's thinking, if the Palestinians put down their weapons, peace could actually happen. Why? Because she saw their actions as, let's call it optional hostility, meaning maybe not directly tied to their own existential survival in the way Israel felt its struggle was.
Right, that was her interpretation.
Her interpretation, exactly. But the flip side for Israel, if they put down their weapons, she was convinced it meant destruction, total annihilation. And that highlights this deep, ongoing anxiety Israel has about just surviving in that region, feeling constantly threatened. For them, the fight wasn't just over land or politics. It felt like preventing being wiped off the map entirely. And that fear, it shaped everything. Israeli security doctrine, public opinion, everything.
Yeah, you can see how that would just seep into the national psyche, especially given the history. But, that viewpoint is also going to be incredibly controversial, right? Especially if you're Palestinian.
Oh, absolutely. No question. It's hugely controversial.
Oh.
And understandably so. From the Palestinian perspective, their armed actions aren't optional hostility at all. They see it as a direct response to occupation, to losing their homes, to, oppression.
Right. A fight for their own rights.
Exactly, for their rights, their dignity, self-determination. It's a completely different lens, a different motivation, and it's absolutely crucial to acknowledge that perspective too. It's the foundation of their struggle. And you see this thread in Mayer's other statements too, like reinforcing this idea that, as she saw it, Palestinian choices were key to ending the violence. There's that other famous and also very controversial quote, "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children, but we can't forgive them for forcing us to kill their children.
Wow.
Peace will come when the Arabs love their children more than they hate us." Now, however you react to that, it really shows her belief, right or wrong, that the core issue was what she perceived as this deep hatred towards Israel, and that overcoming that was the path to peace. It puts a huge weight on the psychological side of things, as she understood it. And this whole mindset, rooted in the Holocaust, centuries of persecution, it just fundamentally shaped Israel's whole approach.
So that perspective, agree or disagree, it becomes this foundational lens, doesn't it? It shapes how the nation sees security, its own existence. Every threat, every negotiation gets filtered through that. It's not just a quote from the 70s. It feels like a core belief that still echoes today in their strategic thinking, their policies, their posture, almost like a survival guide.
Okay, so let's take that idea, that context of deep existential threat in Israel, and pivot. Let's shift across the globe to another place facing its own. Very unique, but also very existential threats, Taiwan.
Right.
The geography, the history, totally different. But that core challenge, surviving next to a much larger, much more powerful neighbor, there are some striking parallels and maybe some really important lessons to unpack.
Okay, so how does that Israeli situation, that whole we can't put down our weapons mindset, how does that resonate with Taiwan? What can Taiwan, this island democracy facing this massive military power in China, what can they possibly learn from Israel's playbook? The scale just seems so different.
It's a great question, and yeah, the scale is immense, but the core dilemma has echoes. Look, China sees Taiwan as part of its territory, a province that must be reunified, and they've never ever ruled out using force.
They make that pretty clear.
Oh, yeah. We don't just hear it. We see it. These massive military drills they run. They're not just practice. They're signals. They're rehearsals for invasion, for blockade. Remember Joint Sword 2024A back in May?
Vaguely, yeah. The big one.
Huge. 111 aircraft, 46 warships, some crossing the median line, basically surrounding the island. That wasn't just flexing. It was a clear message, a test of Taiwan's response, a test of international reaction. It was basically China showing Taiwan, look what we can do, we can cut you off. That really hammers home how urgent Taiwan's defense needs are.
So China's laying its cards on the table, practicing its moves, and Taiwan's watching every single play, like studying game film before the championship.
Exactly like that. Taiwan analyzes China's military modernization meticulously. Not to copy it, no way, but to understand it. What are they good at? Where are the vulnerabilities? They look at China's big leaps in AI, their huge drone programs, their advanced missile systems.
Right.
And understanding that lets Taiwan develop really targeted asymmetric strategies. Like China invests heavily in AI and drones. Okay, Taiwan pushes hard on its own tech, boosting domestic drone production, trying to make their own cheap but effective swarms, and seriously upgrading their cyber defenses. They know they can't just react. They have to anticipate and build smart counters, maybe even leapfrog in certain niche areas.
So it's not about going head-to-head, tank for tank. It's about finding those weaknesses, those pressure points, and developing clever ways to make aggression just too costly, too painful for the other side.
Precisely. And it's not just tech. Analyzing those Chinese exercises gives Taiwan priceless intel on their tactics, their logistics, how their different military branches coordinate or don't coordinate. That helps Taiwan refine its own defense plans, figure out likely invasion routes, stuff like that.
Makes sense.
And we also have to remember the economic angle. China's huge economy, its manufacturing power, especially in things like semiconductors now, that directly fuels its military buildup. Taiwan gets this. They are a world leader in semiconductors, TSMC and all that.
Right. The chip powerhouse.
Exactly. So they understand that link between economic strength and military capability. This means Taiwan isn't just building defenses, it's also racing to keep its own tech edge, its economic strength, because that is part of its defense, leveraging what they're best at.
That's a really smart way to think about it, turning that economic muscle into a kind of strategic asset. So, okay, given all that analysis, what are the specific defense strategies Taiwan's really leaning into?
They've really embraced asymmetric warfare. People call it the porcupine strategy. The idea is simple. Make yourself too painful, too prickly to swallow.
Huh, I like that.
Yeah. They know they can't match China's numbers in troops or tanks or ships. So the strategy is all about capabilities that inflict disproportionate damage on an invader, make the cost of invasion just ridiculously high for Beijing.
How? What kind of stuff?
Think loads of domestically produced drones, advanced anti-ship missiles hidden all over the place, highly mobile land-based missile launchers, really robust cyber defenses to mess with command and control. It's about being agile, precise, hard to find, and packing a serious punch where it hurts most.
And they're looking at Ukraine too, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're studying Ukraine's resistance very closely, how Ukraine used relatively cheap tools like drones and anti-tank missiles to cause huge problems for a much bigger, supposedly more advanced military. Those lessons directly influence what Taiwan buys and how they train.
So, like Ukraine, they're trying to punch way above their weight class, become that indigestible porcupine.
That's the goal. And another huge piece is international cooperation, especially with the U.S. Taiwan works closely with the U.S. on getting advanced weapons, sharing intelligence, doing joint training. It all helps boost their capabilities.
Like the Replicator Initiative.
Exactly. The U.S. Replicator Initiative, aiming to deploy thousands of cheap, autonomous weapon systems that fits perfectly with Taiwan's strategy. It's about swamping an enemy with lots of small, smart, resilient systems, not just relying on a few big, expensive ones. It directly supports Taiwan's asymmetric approach. And it's not just about hardware. Taiwan's pushing this idea of all-out defense. This means getting the whole society involved, not just the military, building resilience from the ground up.
How does that work?
Well, under President Tsai and now Lai, they've set up things like the All-Out Social Defense Resilience Committee. The goal is to get government ministries, businesses, civilians all working together. Think critical infrastructure protection, civil defense drills, emergency medical plans, even psychological resilience training. It's recognizing that modern war hits everything, and the whole nation needs to be ready. National will becomes a weapon.
That's a huge shift, isn't it? It really is like being that nimble startup against the tech giant. You can't build the same thing they build. You got to be smarter, faster, find your niches, leverage your unique strengths. Yeah. And you need your team, your investors, your talent, your allies totally behind you. It's not about winning the slugfest. It's about making the giant think, you know what? Messing with this porcupine is just not worth the pain.
It's a necessary shift, absolutely. For smaller nations facing these kinds of odds, it's not about outspending anymore. It's about outthinking, outmaneuvering, leveraging everything you do, have tech, people, partnerships, building resilience deep down. And for Taiwan, given China's military power and its stated goal of reunification, this kind of smart, adaptive strategy isn't just smart, it's essential for their survival as a democracy.
Okay, let's tackle the giant elephant in the room here, China's perspective, specifically the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Son, you have this great analogy for what Taiwan really represents to them, don't you? Something that gets past the official statements.
I do, and I think it helps cut through a lot of the rhetoric. So since 1949, the CCP has seen the Republic of China, that's Taiwan's government, continuing to exist on Taiwan as basically an unfinished civil war.
Right. They won on the mainland, but not completely.
Exactly. And this isn't just history for them. It creates this two Chinas problem, which directly challenges the CCP's whole story, their narrative of being the one true legitimate ruler of all of China.
Okay, so what's this unfinished pie metaphor you use? How does that illustrate the anxiety?
Think of it like this. The CCP feels they baked this perfect pie in 1949, winning the war, founding the PRC, controlling the mainland. Victory. Total. Done. But wait, there is this one bite left over, this piece of the original Republic of China that escaped to Taiwan. And that piece isn't just sitting there, it's thriving. It's become a democracy. And that leftover bite is this constant nagging reminder that their victory wasn't quite complete. It's like an ideological burr under their saddle. It makes them really, really anxious.
So it's not just about land, it's about the story. Who gets to write the history of China? Who's really in charge? It's like having your old rival's championship ring still sitting on their finger, even after you supposedly won the title. It bugs you. But for the CCP, it's way deeper than being bugged. It's about their fundamental claim to rule.
Exactly right. Taiwan's existence, especially as this successful democracy, it's a fundamental threat to the CCP's one-party legitimacy. It whispers, hey, maybe the RSC wasn't totally beaten. Maybe there was another way for China. And worse, it might look like a successful alternative model that could inspire people on the mainland. That is the core anxiety. It's not just strategy or territory. It's an ideological challenge to their very right to govern. And because of that deep anxiety, the CCP works tirelessly on multiple fronts to basically erase the ROC, to undermine Taiwan. How? Well, ideologically and legally, they constantly deny the RSC exists. They call Taiwan's government a rebel regime, separatists. We heard that from their ambassador in France just recently, right? It's constant messaging to delegitimize Taiwan's identity, push their one China narrative.
So controlling the story domestically and internationally.
Totally. And then there's the powerful nationalist narrative. You hear slogans like national rejuvenation, Taiwan goes home, cross-strait family. It frames taking Taiwan not as conquest, but as this patriotic destiny, this inevitable family reunion. It rallies support and masks those deeper legitimacy worries. It plays on history and pride. Then, of course, the obvious stuff. Military pressure and these gray zone tactics. We talked about the big drills, the invasion rehearsals, but also the day-to-day stuff, flying jets across the median line, sending ships to circle the island, deploying missiles nearby. These aren't quite acts of war, but they're designed to push boundaries, intimidate, wear Taiwan down psychologically and physically without triggering a full-blown conflict. It's constant pressure.
A nonstop campaign of intimidation, basically.
And finally, diplomatic isolation. China works constantly to peel away Taiwan's remaining diplomatic allies, offering big economic deals to countries like São Tomé and Príncipe or the Dominican Republic to get them to switch recognition from Taipei to Beijing.
Right, shrinking their space on the world stage.
Exactly. Make it harder for Taiwan to act like an independent country, reinforce Beijing's one China claim. But here's something really important, something Beijing often seems to miss. Taiwan itself has changed, especially since the 90s, and definitely with younger generations. There's been this huge shift away from thinking of themselves as the Republic of China, with some claim to the mainland. Now it's overwhelmingly a distinct Taiwanese identity.
They see themselves as Taiwanese, not mainland Chinese who happen to live on an island.
Precisely. They're focused on their own democracy, their own culture. They have zero interest in retaking the mainland. But the CCP sees this strong Taiwanese identity as separatism. It's a direct threat to their one China idea. It makes that unfinished pie even harder to swallow because the people themselves don't want to be part of that pie anymore. So Beijing reacts even more strongly.
So Taiwan's moved on, but China hasn't, and sees Taiwan's very evolution as a bigger threat. Wow, it's a huge disconnect.
It really is. And, it's worth noting that many scholars, many observers look at the CCP's talk about the 1992 consensus, the supposed agreement on one China, and they see it as just, rhetoric, a way to paper over the fundamental disagreement about sovereignty. Because the undeniable fact is the People's Republic of China has never governed Taiwan. Not for one day. Right. Taiwan has been self-governing since 1949. Own government. Military, money, democracy. That reality profoundly challenges Beijing's historical claims. So yeah, that deep anxiety, that sense of unfinished business, it's absolutely critical to understanding China's actions towards Taiwan. It's not just about land or strategy. It's woven into the CCP's identity and its perceived legitimacy. So it's a wound they keep trying to close.
Man, this whole unfinished wars idea, it's not just about these two places, is it? It opens up so many other questions. About survival, about resilience, about power dynamics, about how history weighs on the present.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because we can start seeing patterns. We can ask, okay, what does all this mean for other countries? Or even for us, just trying to understand how these conflicts tick, what the real stakes are. Let's dig into that a bit. First, this idea of asymmetric conflict survival. The big question is, how do small nations facing these huge neighbors actually craft survival strategies? Can Israel and Taiwan really learn from each other here? Well, look at Israel's experience again. They've survived, even thrived sometimes, through a mix of things. High-tech advantages like Iron Dome, that's huge. Amazing intelligence, right? Mossad has this global reputation and this total mobilization, active defense idea, sometimes hitting first. Their geography, being so small and surrounded, demands quick reactions.
So tech, intel, and readiness, born out of necessity.
Pretty much. Now, Taiwan. They're also going asymmetric drones, missiles, learning from Ukraine's low-cost, high-impact tactics. But here's a key difference. Taiwan has the sea, the Taiwan Strait. That's a natural barrier, some strategic depth Israel just doesn't have on land. So, does that mean Taiwan needs to double down on naval and air defenses? Maybe invest more in things like sea mines, anti-ship missiles, underwater drones to make that strait a death trap for any invasion force? And can Taiwan really build its own Iron Dome equivalent for missiles? Leverage that incredible semiconductor expertise to become a true tech fortress?
That's such a cool idea, turning chip manufacturing dominance into a hardened shield. It really highlights how survival can drive incredible innovation, doesn't it? Maybe turning a perceived disadvantage being smaller into an advantage in specific high-tech areas. It's not just about armies, it's smart defense using your unique strengths.
Absolutely. It shows defense is shifting. It's not just size. It's about being smart, agile, innovative, and making yourself too costly to attack.
Okay, what about this all-out defense and social resilience? That sounds massive. How do Israel's nation in arms thing and Taiwan's efforts compare? How do you actually build that societal toughness? Israel's model is intense, mandatory service at 18, decades of reserve duty. It creates this society where national security feels like everyone's job. It reflects that Mayor-era survival instinct. It's like everyone knows the fire drill, not just the firefighters. But like we touched on, how do you get everyone on board? What if people don't agree on the threat or don't want to participate?
And that's a real challenge for Taiwan. They are making moves. Extending military service to a year is a big step. Establishing that all-out social defense resilience committee to try and coordinate things. These are important. But, public buy-in varies. Military training isn't universally popular. Awareness of the actual risk, it's maybe not as high across the board as you might think after decades of relative peace. And Taiwan's society is diverse, different politics, different background. Forging that single-minded unity, like Israel has, historically anyway, is harder. So can Taiwan learn from how Israel integrates national security into education from a young age? And in today's world, how do you use tech, AI, social media, not just for military stuff, but to counter disinformation from China, to keep people informed and united, not divided? And how do you sustain that readiness long-term, like Israel's reserves, without burning people out?
Yeah, societal resilience is huge. It's way more than just military gear. It's the nation's collective spirit, its readiness across the board, schools, media, communities. The people themselves as part of the defense.
Okay, then there's international support in dealing with diplomatic isolation. Both Israel and Taiwan face this, though in different ways. How do they navigate that complex world stage to survive? Israel's approach is pretty pragmatic. Super strong U.S. alliance, that's the bedrock. Military aid, diplomatic cover, but also reaching out to Arab nations with the Abraham Accords. Building new partnerships based on shared interests, even with past rivals. They get tons of criticism, especially at the UN, but they leverage their value counterterrorism, intel, tech to keep key relationships strong.
So it's not just about having official friends. It's about being indispensable to the friends you do have and even finding common ground with others, like having a few really solid allies who need you as much as you need them.
Exactly. Taiwan's situation is tougher diplomatically. Only a dozen or so official allies left, thanks to Beijing's constant pressure. But Taiwan's been really smart about building strong unofficial ties with the U.S., Japan, the EU, others. U.S. arms sales, the Taiwan Relations Act, those are lifelines.
Right.
But they still struggle for basic participation in global bodies like the WHO. China blocks them at every turn. So for Taiwan, the diplomatic fight is often just about getting a seat at the table, being heard, so comparing them. Israel relies a lot on its security value. Taiwan's big lever is economic, though, semiconductors. The world needs them. So can Taiwan maybe learn from Israel's pragmatic diplomacy, use its economic clout to build more substantive cooperation, especially in Asia and Europe, even without formal recognition, become indispensable in a different way?
Which brings us to maybe the toughest part, peace talks, or the lack of them. What can the history of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, or the failures, teach Taiwan about dealing with China? Man, the Israeli-Palestinian track record is rough. Oslo Accords in the 90s seemed promising, but ultimately fell apart. Land disputes, security, settlements, refugees, just deep, deep mistrust. And that Mayor-era security focus often meant Israel wasn't willing to make big concessions, fearing it wouldn't bring real peace anyway. It's like trying to negotiate when one side feels its very existence is on the line with every compromise. How do you even start that conversation when the trust isn't there and the power imbalance is so huge?
And Taiwan faces a similar brick wall, in a way. Beijing insists on the 1992 consensus accepting one China just to start talking. But Taiwan's current government sees that as undermining their sovereignty, a non-starter. So dialogue is pretty much frozen.
A total impasse.
Right. So the challenges for Taiwan are immense. Can they find any wiggle room? Maybe try for cooperation on smaller things, economic issues, climate, pandemics, just to build a tiny bit of trust or at least keep lines open? Do they need constant U.S. or Japanese involvement just to manage the standoff? And how does Taiwan's democracy play into this? The government has to answer to its people, unlike Beijing. That limits their negotiating room. Could Taiwan aim for something like Israel's cold peace with Egypt, not resolving everything, but finding a way to stabilize things, reduce the risk of conflict? How do they balance what their own public wants with what the international community, especially the U.S., might push for?
It's so clear that peace isn't just about signing a paper. It's this incredibly complex dance of trust, give and take, managing expectations, or just accepting that sometimes you can't get there from here, at least not right now. And that recognition itself is tough.
Last big area here, cognitive warfare, the battle for minds. How does Israel build that public consensus on security? And what can Taiwan learn to fight back against China's flood of disinformation?
Yeah.
Israel works hard at this. Education, media, government messaging, it all reinforces this narrative of national survival, the need for unity and vigilance. It creates a strong sense of shared purpose, shared threat. It's very deliberate.
So it's not just about weapons anymore. It's about what people believe, what story they accept is real. It's information warfare, psychological warfare, a battle for the narrative.
Exactly. And Taiwan is right in the crosshairs. China uses everything: media influence, cyber attacks, floods of fake news on social media, all aimed at confusing, dividing, demoralizing Taiwanese society. They try to paint anyone who supports Taiwan's autonomy as an extremist separatist. They target fact-checkers, try to infiltrate institutions. Taiwan has defenses, fact-checking groups, awareness campaigns, but the public is still pretty divided politically, which makes it harder to build that unified front against the war. And again, comparing with Israel, Israel's historically more unified society maybe made consensus easier. Taiwan's diverse democracy needs a more subtle approach. Can they borrow from Israel's crisis education ideas? Can they use AI better to spot and counter disinformation faster? Could they even partner with Israeli cyber experts? They need robust digital defenses just as much as physical ones.
It really drives home that being informed, media literacy, critical thinking, these aren't just nice to haves anymore. They're actually part of national defense in the 21st century. Knowing what's real is a form of protection.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway from this journey through unfinished wars?
I think it really hammers home that for some countries, peace isn't a given. It's this constant, maybe unending struggle for sheer survival. And these old conflicts, these unfinished stories, they're not just history. They're casting these incredibly long shadows on today.
Yeah, I think the key points are: both Israel and Taiwan face these deep existential threats that shape everything they do defensively. For China, that unfinished civil war idea is less about territory and more about this gnawing anxiety over its own legitimacy, often hidden behind nationalist slogans.
Right.
Smaller nations can survive against giants by using smart, asymmetric strategies, building resilience throughout society, and playing clever, pragmatic diplomacy. And finally, this cognitive warfare stuff. It's a major battlefront now. You need an informed, unified population as your first line of defense. The fight for minds is critical.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you listening out there. Something to chew on. If these huge, historical, unfinished wars are still shaping global politics so profoundly, what unfinished business from our own histories, personal, family, community might be quietly shaping us? Our views, our fears, our choices, maybe in ways we don't even realize. It's kind of mind-bending to think how old stories can still have such real current power in our own lives.
Exactly. It's a great reminder that really understanding the world and maybe ourselves means looking deeper than the news cycle. It means digging into those currents of history, human nature, memory. And yeah, that's what we try to do here on Sip and Talk.
And that wraps up another Sip and Talk. Hope you found that as thought-provoking as we did. And hopefully your beverage stayed in its cup.
Definitely. And hey, if you enjoyed this, please do hit that subscribe button for Sip and Talk wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really helps us out.
And one more thing. A huge shout out to our friend Micky. Gotta check out his YouTube channel. It's called Micky to Life. Seriously, cool stuff. Funny memes, great music, wine tasting, travel, just all the good things. Micky to Life.
You won't regret it. Thanks so much for sipping and talking with us today. We'll catch you next time.
Bye, everyone.